So when it comes down to it, I'm not that hard to please. When it comes down to films and TV, it's only things that in my mind are quite easy to get right that will make me happy. One of the main things I don't see enough in films and TV is a significant and distinct personality. Too much looks the same and doesn't try to be anything different, We have wonderful directors like Sam Esmail that takes kind of familiar subjects and approaches them with such style and such a unique finesse, and I think that's a great thing to have. On that note, this year, a new Netflix original has arrived called Russian Doll. I've watched it from start to finish. I was hooked from episode 1. And as I said a moment ago about Sam Esmail taking familiar subjects and making them unique, this is the thing. It doesn't have to be anything completely revolutionary. It can be something very familiar, but just as long as it has its own unique stamp on it, I'm fine with that. Russian Doll is one of these. So, it's Groundhog Day, it's Happy Death Day, it's the same familiar thing we've seen before, a looping day, a day that repeats. Something happens and it starts the day over again. In this case, it's death, so the main character will die and it will start the loop over again. But my god, does this series ever do it in a wonderfully unique, quirky, bizarre, surreal, and fantastic way. So this series is created by Leslye Headland, Natasha Lyonne, and Amy Poehler. And Natasha Lyonne plays the main character, and it's no surprise she has a large role in the creation of this series because she fits this character absolutely perfectly. She's very cynical, she's very witty, she's very funny, she's very unique, and it's just great. The story starts with one of the main characters, Nadia, on her birthday. It's a big party and she wants to take a guy home. However, she ends up dying and then wakes up again at her birthday party. Everything is exactly the same, and that is the beginning of the loop, which will be the conceit of the series. Further down the line, we find that there's another character sharing similar issues, and these two main characters are interlinked and their stories become interwoven in a really interesting way. This series starts off as what seems to be a typical comedy, a grounded comedy, but as it develops, it becomes so much more than that. It has so much more depth, and it has these unique elements of mystery, unique elements of sci-fi, of horror, of drama. It's wonderful the way it develops. Now, to be fair, let's go over some negatives before we go over anything else, because that's something that I like to do. Obviously, this is something we've seen before. This is a formula, this is a format that we've seen before. That's one issue I have with it. We have seen this quite a few times. And as I say, it does do unique and different things with it, but it is something we've seen before. So, I really don't have much else to say in terms of the negatives. I wish that some of the support characters could have been more fleshed out and more developed. It's really just about the two main characters of Nadia and Alan. Alan Zaveri is played by Charlie Barnett, and he also fits this role pretty much perfectly. I should have finished my review on The Good Place by now, but I haven't. That has some similar aspects to this, actually. I was feeling similarities, especially in the characters. What I loved about The Good Place is that there are some really well-developed characters. What I love about this, even more so, are the characters, because they are just incredibly well fleshed out, and they have their own personal development as the series goes on. So as I say, we have Nadia, a very cynical and witty character, but then on the other hand we have Alan's character, who is very much OCD, very much an anxious type of person, is very scared to be confident and to speak out about his issues, and as the series goes on, each of these characters grows in different ways, and they become, at the end of it, very different people. And we don't see enough of that. We don't see characters enough in modern series, so it was really refreshing to see that. Now, in terms of, you know, style and personality, this has some fantastic music going on in it. It has wonderful music. It even, it really doesn't feel like you're watching a modern series. It feels like this is a series that goes back to the 60s. It has some great old tracks in it, but as well as that, it has the actual soundtrack, which is, it's really deep, and it adds a lot of emotion to what I thought was going to be basically a full-on comedy. But as the series develops, it becomes definitely a more dark and sinister series. It actually looks at this whole idea of a repeating day in a rather horrifying way. It's quite scary, and towards the end of it, these characters are they're at a loss of what to do. It is destroying the world around them, and that's an interesting thing about this. It's not just the same day on repeat. The way the world changes around them as the days repeat gets really, really interesting. It goes into a lot of sci-fi kind of themes. It goes into a lot of ideas of like the many worlds theory, you know. It goes into the idea of the fourth dimension having multiple timelines that are adjacent to each other, and as it gets towards the end of the series, you really start to understand why the series is called Russian Doll. Now, another thing I adored about this series is how lived in the environment feels, how real it feels, how real the support characters feel, how real the city feels, because it's set in New York, and it has it makes me want to go there, because I can really imagine New York being like this. Loads of quirky, interesting characters, loads of fantastic musicians and interesting people. There's one character called Horse, and he is one of the local gutter punks, as Nadia calls them. He's kind of a hobo travelling man type of person, but even his character is really interesting, and I want to try and work out a little bit more about why he says some of the things he does, because he's a very weird character, as you will find out if you watch it. In terms of the cinematography, I always bang on about cinematography because I think it's an important thing to bang on about, and I don't think enough people that review movies and TV bang on about it enough, so I'm going to bang on about cinematography for a second. No, unfortunately, this doesn't have the most mind-blowing cinematography, and I just felt that if it did have a real sense of its own style in terms of the cinematography, that would have just put it up to a complete 10 out of 10 for me. But it's fairly generic, but what I do like is the use of colour. It is a very warm and inviting film. It's very endearing, and you have these wonderful contrasts between the characters. When you have Nadia's character, there's a lot of oranges, a lot of warm colours because of her fleshed out character, because she's so wild and she's so open with herself. But then you have Alan's character, who is very OCD and very anxious and very anal about things, and when you start off in his world, his house is very white and grey and black, and having that kind of contrast is a clever and interesting thing to do. So I loved it. What a good series. What a wonderful series to come along out of nowhere, because I hadn't heard about this. I hadn't heard that this was coming. I hadn't seen any trailers for it. I hadn't heard a single thing. And you know, I don't know these creators too well, but I do know Amy Poehler, because she created Parks and Recreation. She was a part of Inside Out, and I love Parks and Recreation. I think it's hilarious. I do prefer it to the US Office, but I doubt many people in this world would agree with me on that one. So I find that really funny, and I can see elements of her comedy within it. I definitely can. It's just a very intelligent and well-made series, and clearly these creators had a similar goal in mind when creating watching this. The sci-fi elements were fantastic. I'm always a big fan of time-based stuff, you know, not so much time travel, but multiple timelines, the world shifting and changing because of events that shouldn't be taking place. I find that stuff really fascinating. Maybe in the future I'll do a spoiler review of this where I go into some discussion on how the timelines work and that kind of stuff. But anyway, brilliant series. I loved it. I've got to say, it's fantastic. Really enjoyed it. I'm going to be giving this one an 8.5 out of 10. So, next review coming up is for Velvet Buzzsaw, the latest film with my favourite Jake Gyllenhaal in it. It's quite a wacky film. It's quite bizarre. I really enjoyed it, but it didn't seem to get quite a good reception from critics. And I don't really know why, because I thought it was pretty unique. I think it was massively inspired by the Coen brothers. It had a very Coen brothers feel to it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching. If you have, please do leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to help support me and my channel. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you in the next one. Take care now.